Yes, thank you very much, Paul. Very warm welcome to everyone for the first Urban Tree Festival Book Club of 2021. It's an absolute thrill to have Rob Cowan and Nick Hayes here, who have produced this sensational book, The Heeding, which is not out yet. It's out on, I think, on the 17th of June. It's published by Elliott and Thompson. And I'm going to tell you a tiny bit about Nick and Rob, which it says in the front of The Heeding, but also you can feast your eye on that cover, which is just gorgeous. Nick is in the top left of my screen. There we are, that's Rob holding up a proper hardback version of it. Rob Cowan is an award-winning writer, hailed as one of the UK's most original voices in nature and place. His book, Common Ground, was shortlisted for the Portico Richard Jefferies Society and Wainwright Prizes, and voted one of the nation's favourite nature books on BBC Winter Watch. He lives in North Yorkshire, and Nick Hayes is a writer, illustrator, and printmaker. He is the author of the Sunday Times bestseller, The Book of Trespass, Crossing the Lines That Divide Us. He's published graphic novels with Jonathan Cape, and he lives on the Kennet and Avon Canal. The Heeding, which I've been reading for the last week, is an absolutely beautiful book of poetry. It's moving, it's uplifting, it's powerful, it's potent, and it made me cry. And how often can you say that about a book of poetry? So it's a thrill to have you here. Thank you. And Rob, I'm going to ask you the first question. What is The Heeding and how did you come up with it?
Well, The Heeding really is a memorial to and a meditation on an extremely uncertain, unmoored year that we have just all been through. And it's really a book of poems, and it was born out of this strange, unmoored, uncentered, uncertain days of lockdown. But really, the poems, I hope, speak to a bigger universal themes to do with love, loss, grief, hope, family, all these different things.
Did you really realize quite early on in the year that you were going to write this book, and did you realize it was going to be poetry and not prose?
No, not at all. The opposite. I started keeping a sort of diary of poems because I didn't really have the words to describe what we were going through at that point. And I genuinely couldn't have written in a prose sense about it at all. And I'm not sure why that was, but poetry for me has always had this kind of emotional power, this elemental, open to the elements power that's a bit rawer and a bit more sort of, there's a reason why people get poems read at weddings and funerals, is because it somehow speaks to a higher level of emotion in a funny way. And when I started writing, I was just trying to thoughts and this sort of strange change of relationship to nature. Really, I was struck with this sense of nature as this duality of this thing that's so essential to our lives and that we all seek to protect and to connect with. But at the same time, nature is something that, as we saw with this pandemic, something that can kill us easily and we have no defense against. So it's something we have to respect and honor and look after, but it's also something we have to come to terms with as the thing that gives us life and ultimately takes our life.
Yes, there's a lot of that in the poems, and it's incredibly powerful. We'll probably come back to that a lot. I wanted to ask you, though, first, at what point you started thinking this was going to be a book of poetry, because the poems do follow through the year, and at what point you decided to get Nick involved?
Well, like most people who write prose, I'm a bit embarrassed about poetry because there is a whole poetry scene which is very cliquey and small and has, people who do poetry open night mics and things. And so I was very self-conscious about writing the poems in that sense. But on the flip side, I've always written lyrics. I've always written poems since I was about 11. I just never put them out anywhere. And well, really, I had a piece of poetry in the Letters to the Earth book that came out last year. But really, I just kept these poems as a way of processing and thinking, and I kept a record. And about halfway through the year, I realized that they were acting in this kind of they were a sort of witness statement and a witness testimony to what we were going through. But also they said a lot of things that I wanted to try and say about that time that I didn't feel I could say in prose and even out loud. So I was conscious about that. I wasn't thinking I'm going to get these out here, this is going to be great. You know, I was thinking I want to write a poem about my son and me and the moon, because it's killing me, the idea that I might not be around in 3 months. And
that is a beautiful, beautiful poem about the moon.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Yes. So how do you possibly, it seems now that we're coming through it very different to the heat of the moment of last year when I wrote Moon Over Skipton Road, which is the poem you're talking about. Just after the government said they were predicting 500,000 deaths in the UK by summer, you know, so that was the kind of the heat of the moment thing. But really, then Nick's work I've admired a long time. I was reading the Book of Trespass. I knew his work from a long time ago.
Did you know Nick?
No, we've never met in person. Only ever. That's the other amazing thing about.
You've literally never. This is the way you meet, Nick, is it?
It's the way we meet, and by phone. And I reached out to Nick and said, "Look, I want to try and do this book and make it something special that speaks to and of this time and of these themes, but also of this moment particularly." And I called him, and Nick was really kind, and I read some poems to him down the phone, and he got it straight away. And I think, you know, I'm not going to speak for Nick, but this isn't something he was thinking, oh, I'm going to get involved in a book. But I think we both had this awareness that this was something really special and different.
And where were you at that moment, Nick, when you received this email? And you were living in your houseboat at that time?
Yeah, I was. I'd basically got the houseboat with my girlfriend around September time, just to get the hell out of Dodge. From a COVID point of view, I'd spent the first lockdown doing squat jumps in the foyer of our tower block, trying to break a sweat, but just in this mode, like just to try and stay healthy. And so we'd finally bought a boat together, doing it up, you know, building the kitchen and the bathroom and stuff. And basically, I was, even a month after publication of the Book of Trespass, I was beginning to get sick of just all the work, basically. And I was on this for now, and I just wanted to do nothing for a good 6 months. And I started reading some of the poems, and I had this sort of crushing sense of disappointment that I was going to have to, it would be such an honor. Like, they made me cry as well. And I'm not normally, like, I'm one of those people that doesn't really know where poetry fits into my life. I don't take the time to sit down and take 15 minutes to do a poem kind of thing over a cup of tea. It's just not part of my pattern.
No, I don't think it's part of many people's lives anymore. And this is what's so wonderful, to have them actually brought back to us.
Well, these things are like, I don't know, Martin Scorsese says how Bob Dylan's written so many lyrics that even when speaking to him, it's sort of like he ends up speaking in couplets or something. It's almost like the reverse. These poems were just like speaking to someone, or being spoken to, or they were conversational. There was a distinct lack of the kind of pretension that, or the obfuscation, the mistiness, the kind of abstract meaning that means I have to sort of think.
Yes, the poet that this is going to take it to the top level, I'm warning you, but the poet that sprang to mind was Wordsworth, because he tried to use the language of the common man, as he said. So, and that's what you've done. I mean, of course, that's what you've tried to do, I hope, I presume, was you were trying to use the language that would reach us more easily, those of us who don't read a lot of poetry.
Also, it kind of went back to songwriting, you know, and a lot of the, you know, I'm not a formal poet, you know, again, I don't even know what that means. And most poets who've read the book so far have reached out to me and said, thank God you're writing like this, because, you know, poetry has got so stuck in its own circle, its own storms, that somebody writing in a very honest, I mean, there are kind of half rhymes that rhyme with two beats later, and the rhymes that work in the sense of a kind of almost like a rap. There are rhymes that do other things, but really that was because the form was less important than what was being written and said, I think, for me. So there's a kind of honesty and a kind of emotional desperation to some of those poems.
Would you like to read us a poem, please? Because after this talk about it, and I think this is the first public reading.
It is. What do you want me to read?
Well, oh gosh, okay, I'll tell you the one that made me Sunday school.
Sunday school.
Early on, I loved Sunday school.
Okay, let's read this. Yes, this was essentially, I wrote this because I was reflecting on all the things that happened in the beginning of the pandemic were sort of pushing my mind into kind of what's important here. How can I focus in on the small corners of this earth? And at that point, it was my garden out the back of the house.
Garden is a great word.
Well, yeah, and it was a lifesaver for me, just having that square of flower bed. But also there was all this kind of religious talk at the time that was coming out, and so this is a poem that tries to straddle both of those. I haven't read it out loud yet. Well, I have, but not, so okay. Here we go anyway. Sunday school. By 10, I was sick of Sunday school, raging at the unfairness of an extra chore, a weekend's hour of Bible study while grown-ups dined on Christ next door, coloring cartoon Noahs, Egyptian kings, comic book apostles, the Samaritan, Job, envying mates who did more exciting things than preparing their soul for Almighty God. This wasn't rebellion, a stance I'd decided to take. There was no counterpoint then to make, just an internal flinch at Lord of the Dance and post-gospel gossip over coffee and cake. To me, it didn't make much sense to consign to memory what Jesus did, to dress in best and parade affluence while solemnly praying for starving kids. And maybe I said something, I don't know, but on a Sunday jaunt across the moor, at winter's end after spring's last snow, Mum said I didn't have to go anymore. Then changing tack, splitting scripture to core, she schooled me urgently and without show. Priest-like among the curlew, heather and tor, she told me all I've ever needed to know. Be kind, forgive, attend and heed. Be strong, but lead with love, not power. Look for the universe inside the seed and the face of God in the opening flower.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And the word heed is in there, of course, which, and the heeding, I think it's useful to talk a little bit about what you were trying to do with the title and the year that we've been through. You use the word unmoored in the book and when you introduced yourself.
Yeah, heeding is a really interesting old Middle English word from hedon, an old Saxon word, Germanic in its origin, but it essentially means kind of four things: to mind, so heed the gap, to pay attention and to care, to guard and protect, and what I think happened in March last year is that everybody started paying attention in a different way. We all started to look about us, initially because we were concerned about symptoms and who is coughing and who's moving too close to me. But then we began to pay attention in a different way because we realized that the small confines of our entrapped lives were it for a year. And this was going to be where I sourced my daily sanity from. This was the place I was going to be able to exercise and walk and look and see. And actually, it reminded me something from writing Common Ground, which is those small, unexplored or familiar and common places that we overlook normally can sustain us. They can enrich our lives. So I began to look and pay attention in a way I never have before. And also there's another dimension to that, which is when you pay attention to nature and the natural world and other people who are struggling or in pain or dying, then you begin to care. You begin to care and look after those things because you see them. You see them and you recognize them. You recognize their value and the value that we take for granted most days. And so the healing is really about that sense of paying attention, that small domesticity of looking and caring and looking after. And so the book really is a call for that sense of looking after not just ourselves and each other and the small spaces, but the planet. Obviously, the planet, we're living through the 6th great extinction, all man-made, climate change. We need to heed the warnings that are being given. The whole virus, the pandemic, is one great warning about what happens when we don't respect nature and we don't respect the world and the ecosystems we live in. So heeding to enrich and protect ourselves, but also to give the world a chance to live. And that's kind of, I feel like this process of heeding, if we could all pay attention to one another, to ourselves and to the world, would be all right, would be okay, you know? So that's kind of how the heeding came as a book. And it's a cry to all of those things, really.
Yes, it is a book of hope. There's some hope threaded through it. We definitely want to come back and talk about hope, but I want to talk about Nick's illustrations a little bit, and I'm going to show, I've marked a couple that are particular. There's a couple of poems in there, Duel 1 and Duel 2, which bookend the book, and they're about a hawk attack. This is Duel 2. Can everyone see that? That is just, it is so dramatic, and also it goes so well, I feel, with the poetry, the work you've done there, Nick. So I'm going to ask you how. This is another amazing spread. There's some spreads, but there's also lovely little ones sprinkled around. But this is brilliant. Also, it reflects the fact that the poetry. I mean, of course, we can talk about you being a nature poet, but you're certainly a society poet. So not that kind of society. So the Jane Austen of poets. So Nick, how did you work on those? What happened? What was the process?
To be honest, the story behind it's probably a bit more pragmatic than it ought to be for such a beautiful collection of words. We all knew from the off that this had to come out as that sense that the onslaught was kind of over and that there was now this sort of pause, almost like as I was chatting to Rob, like sort of like the NHS have done their work. They've held us, they've cradled us, and as we've fallen, and like in a way it's sort of time for the artists to do their bit for society and to kind of look around and take heed and take stock, and where do we go from now? Who were we? What raw wounds are still open, kind of thing. Like how can we begin to heal? So it just had to get out really quickly, and Rob had the benefit of having a year of lockdown to write all those poems, and I basically I guess I had to do it in about 6 weeks.
Wow.
So
there's a lot of illustration in there for 6 weeks.
Well, the sort of lino cut style takes a while as well. So, but it's always the same, really. Like the most creative bit, like you take the poems out into the woods with you, sit down and just shut your eyes and kind of like you don't want the illustrations to just kind of be kind of illustrated versions of the poem. Very much in my mind was this kind of Jackie Morris and Rob McFarlane Lost Words thing, which I think has blown open the possibilities of books. It's almost like graphic novels in reverse. There's like that graphic novels maybe center on the image and adorn them with words, and Lost Words was kind of something that sort of set the words as the kind of spur for it, but the images were like holding the words, kind of thing. They wrapped around and they did everything. And I think that excellent book was has just kind of like bust the door down in terms of like what people, what the orthodoxy is. So it was in my mind, and I just stuff like that Black Lives Matter spread. It was a really cool opportunity, you know, to kind of marry these two surges of nature that came up, you know, these sort of unbounded forces, you know, stags colonizing motorways, so apocalyptic, so kind of the world turned upside down. And then the same kind of natural urge of humans just demanding their rights, and these things like sort of knitted together. To me, they're like natural surges that, as soon as the kind of thrum, the kind of like never-ending hamster wheel of just the way things are, was paused for just a second, boom, up sprouts wildness. Yes. So it was a real pleasure, you know. It was cool to be able to manifest that into an image.
And how do you both feel that now, you know, I know we are sort of coming out of lockdown, but there's, you know, we seem to be sort of teetering out of lockdown, and we don't really know what's going to happen next. But there was a lot of talk during the year, certainly last year, about we were all getting a greater sort of feel and understanding for nature and more connected with, you know, which is of course partly what your book is about. But are you hopeful that as we come out, people are going to carry that with them, or are people just so hungry to rush back to what they once knew that it's going to spark an even greater frenzy of consumption?
Shall I go first, Nick?
Go on
then. My feeling is that when you look at the things that came out after the Second World War, the trauma of the war wasn't really there in 46, 47, 48, certainly not culturally, but it really kicked in a bit later. That you could argue that's a lot to do with the psychology of the society at the time. But I think what happened was that people, they did carry with them a suspicion and fear of war, especially in this country, because they knew what its effects were on people's minds and generally on the world. As the trials of Auschwitz and with the Nazis in Auschwitz and everything became revealed, all that stuff we became horrified about what was happening. And I think Nick's right. I think the pause that has occurred in the world's systems and the world naturally roll on year to year. I think the pause has let people see that these things are important. But also the fact is, you know, there are something like 100,000 viruses out there that can leap species if we don't respect those species and habitats and other things. So I don't know how many pandemics like this the world could survive. So I think that governments will have to take it seriously. You know, whoever you vote for, the same person gets in, but we've got to change that. We've got to change that and get the right people in. And I say right at the beginning of the book in the introduction, you know, I hope we come out changed. All of us have been changed by this. I don't think we realize how much we've been changed by it yet, as Nick said, but I think hopefully art and music and writing and words will help us process and understand. But I think through that process and that understanding, we will change. We will change. And we're bloodied and we're wounded, but I think we'll come out changed, but changed for the better.
That's a very positive and lovely thought. And there's several of your poems that reflect that. But I particularly think of the ones on your allotment, which obviously came to mean a lot during the lockdown, the people you met and the sort of common feeling that was engendered there. I'm going to ask you for another poem before we speak to Nick again. Would you like to read another poem for us?
Yeah, which
you have one you particularly want to read? But
Nick, why don't you choose one?
Well, allotment's long, but it's
it is long. You could do the second half of it. or there's the pharmacy one, or I mean, it's, you know, in terms that was a
yeah. Well,
yeah.
maybe I should do the, because I think what I want to get across is that there is this central section to this book, which is it is angry and political, and it is about wishing that things would change. And I think maybe I'll read this allotment, maybe, and just because I think it says everything. It was the one that I read to Nick, and he was like, you know, that just says everything that I think and believe. So maybe I should just read that. What do you think?
I think you should read that.
I don't know.
I'm going to run for a wee, but I will be back.
Okay.
Good thing it's a long
Nick
term.
wheeze. I'll read this allotment. Yeah. This allotment. The gate would not open. Deadlock. Key stuck firmly in padlock, and me harried, struggling until I was ready to abandon the whole damn thing before it had even begun. An intervention. Someone passing with the right tools said, "Don't fret. This happens a lot. You just need to know the knack." Hands twisted with experience, then just like that, I was through, carrying all I had, arriving in a new place, searching for a plot. The setting, a patchwork of what was field, tilting down towards Beck, rising again to Killing Hall and more. As big a sweep of sky as you can get, survivor of time and all weathers, square of possibility, bequeathed in goodwill, jealously overlooked by houses, roads, backyards for being what it is, old soil, blessed, left through centuries to tick over to the rhythm of that old chant, dig, turn, manure, break, plant, water, weed, pick, rot. The soil begrudges not the cast of beetles, worms, spiders, frogs, slugs, snails, or ancient ancestries of rats and wood pigeons. It welcomes back the time slip kites, the fox and heat nights, the frenzies of birth and death, the seeds, yellow teeth and bones of long ago devoured cows. What a strange and familiar home this is, split by its rickety barricades, conjoined by bedroom shelves, 70s bathtubs, reclaimed floors, filing cabinets, front doors, the make, do, and mend philosophy of prehistory. Enough junk to make good fences, enough air, space, and luminous living things to feed a family, to spark and fire the senses. Some days a riot, some days frozen, eerie quiet, but a ragged tribe at work always. A moan, nod, or hello, how's it going? What have you got? Do you want to swap? Or some seeds going spare that you can't refuse or pay for, or a bumper crop left anonymously by the compost, or a hand to lend, and now and then a can of beer at very end of day, summer sunset, a shed looking away to the west, rooks, swifts scrambling up to sky nests. Today, a woman repairing a greenhouse, twins in tow, humoring the old man and his unrequired advice because she knows he's really aching for a daughter, gone to live in Australia, and there's no one home. The new widow who gave us raspberry ripple apples by the bucket that first year in a headscarf. A lad who smokes weed in his shed while he makes raised beds for the ladies opposite, who are always impeccably dressed and sometimes subtly hold hands. And the couple from Ghana who grow tall, succulent corn like you never tasted. All these people rooted in messy rows of chard and spinach and strawberries and potatoes, all poised now, like me, sweaty and red, leaning on a spade with dirt smeared across my forehead, watching the sky catching light, aching but content. And not one of us knows the time or cares. For 8 years, a man patiently tilled the plot next to mine, a grey-haired Mauritian, a nurse at the hospital who post-shift nursed this earth, a man of luxuriant stories and recipes, spice insights. You must dry fry in batches, try, promise me. He brought found things for the children to collect, pennies, bent pins, a key, buttons and clay pipes, handfuls of clay pipes. They must have smoked all the bloody time, those Victorians. Once he disappeared for a while, months, his absence registered in the bolted pak choi and unruly weeds. The ground resented his wayward of affections. It threw up groundsel, dandelion, and sow thistle with shocking speed. I became worried and aware of how deeply I cared. Inquiries met shrugs, head shakes. Out of friendship, I appeased the season, making a petulant point on his patch. I tidied dwarf beans, watered when I needed, and almost wept when I came down one morning and found him lounging in a chair. I've been back home, he laughed. The sun there. And so I thought nothing when it happened again months later. But then his cousin, with a plot down the other end of the site, was there one day, wondering if I'd help clear his shed. Didn't you hear, he said, tears rising at my confusion. He left us 3 weeks ago. He went in the night. When hearts soar, I often wonder if this place is secretly a model for what should be, how things could be, were we not so preoccupied with property. The space to be alone, yet many, to work the small corners in unity, to be granted parity from the off, where difference is welcomed for its new thoughts, fruits, new perspectives, new voices adding new depths to the old chants, where the chance to be author of our own fate is grasped with both hands. Life in common, a law beholden to land, season, and locality, governed by the health of the soil and each other. Oh, there'd be fierce competition still. We're human after all, but where winning might mean sharing, earning the right to brag, but where prizes are bagged and left by the gate with flowers for new arrivals. We're given such scant measures, so few years in the sun, such poor odds. But we're the privileged ones, arriving without the press of brutality or cruel legacy or ground ravaged by drought and war. Even then, life is fragile and gossamer thin. No sooner are we through the gate, narrowing our eyes into wind, than we're mediating. Let this seed grow, please, not these weeds. Spare us from frost and disease. Word to the wise, a man once told me, handing over beans. Plant 3, one for the birds, one for the earth, one for thee. Then get on the knees and attend to what comes up tirelessly. Maybe that's the truce we all need to reach, or the harmony. For one evening too soon, the gate will be open. We'll notice day has darkened, the sunset gone behind the hill. And just as we're wondering, who's that been left for? A voice on the wind will start to whisper, come on now, come on, someone else's turn. We'll hear the old chant, dig, turn, manure, break, plant, water, weed, pick, rot, and realize that the flowers have been left not for those arriving, but those leaving. And we'll wish we had one more season to witness perfection, but somewhere a bell will be ringing and we'll already be walking home.
Thank you, Rob. It's
Thank
amazing.
you. Thanks.
I'm glad I asked you to read that because obviously I've read it myself, but that was lovely.
Well, there's a picture of Nick behind it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Which you should...
There it is.
That's the allotment.
Did you send him a photo or has he made it up?
I sent him lots of photos. Yeah. Yeah. I was kind of expecting a sort of Picasso sort of cubist thing, like it's the allotment from every angle possible. But no, I love it. I mean, I love Nick's drawings, and what we decided early on, he's being modest about it, but what we decided early on was that along with the written narrative, there'd be a visual narrative that intertwined and put in the beats and the heartbeats and the punches and the emotional punches that that really help carry these poems into people's hearts and into their heads.
Yes, and it certainly does that. We're starting to get some questions in, but I wanted to, before I do anything with that, Nick, we've, Rob has mentioned there common ground and things in common, and obviously you've written the book of Trespass. So to go back to our question earlier as well about how we were emerging from from lockdown. Do you think there's an opportunity now? Is there sort of are things changing possibly? Do you want to quickly summarize what's going on with the Book of Trespass and what you hope to do with it?
I mean, generally speaking, like with Sisters Uncut, Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, the policing bill, none of our rights have been given to us. Like the change is entirely proportional to the amount of boots on the ground, quite frankly. I don't know what they've done uniting Sisters Uncut with Black Lives Matter and XR, who were always there in solidarity with each other. But and now, I mean, this summer's just going to be busy, basically. As oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Let me put
it was briefly, but we can hear you.
I mean, Rob's poem says it all. It gets me. It really gets me. We need places where we can meet with parity, and we can work with the land. We can get our fingers into the soil. This notion that we have 144,000 miles of pathway in England and Wales, and we can walk and pass and repass, and that is the sum total of our connection with the divine, just sucks balls, basically. We need to interact with nature. We need to interact with it in order to care, and we need it for our own peace of mind. And as Rob's poem puts it, like we need to meet each other in a context where one doesn't have systemic power over the other. And these things are possible because that systemic power has just been contrived. And Rob wrapping that all up into essentially birth to death, you know, it really gets me. It's the clarion call for our campaign. I mean, if people want to join the campaign, write2rome.org.uk, but we need to, at the moment, talk about the bigger things, because like we're just going to work our asses off to free the rivers, woodland and greenbelt, quite frankly. Like that's our goals. If we get 100,000 people, it might happen. If we get 300,000 people, it will happen. It's just down to us to be to express it in such a way that people know that we're not looking to run amok over land, that what we're really trying to do is to connect deeper with the nature that we care so deeply about. Yes. But we've got loads of trickster, slippery, charming ways that we're going to do that over the next 3 years. So, you know, bad time to be the Duke of Bookclub.
He heard it here first. He's probably not tuned in, I guess.
He's listening. He's got
coins to count.
So here's a question from the Q&A. Rob, could you talk about our observation of ways people start? This is from Catherine Alto. Could you talk about our observation of ways people started heeding inwardly? You're talking about outwardly right now, but what about inner landscapes, those places inside of us? Did you get that, Rob? You've frozen briefly on the question.
Well, it's not a question, but
it is a good question.
I mean, one of the things that actually Catherine noticed about this book, I know she's read the book. What actually
we've lost Rob. Sorry, would you mind saying that again?
Sorry.
We lost you briefly.
Yeah, can you hear me still?
Yes, we can now.
I was saying, Catherine, your reading of this book is so astute because you noticed that it essentially charts this year that begins with this metaphor of the hawk as nature that is violent, that is killing and comes in and kills. But then, you know, as Peter said, dual part 1, dual part 2. There's the hawk, there's the grip of the virus gripping the world, nature coming into our backyards and killing. And then there's the escape at the end, and there's a relief at the end. And everybody who's reading this book has made it through something. But what's also important that Catherine noticed is that there's a strange suspension that happens. There's a poem in here called How a Spider is Seen, which is about being in suspense and being held between. And that's what happened during this year. And I think the heeding that Catherine is asking about there is about how do we come to terms with ourselves? And I think that's something we've got to do. If we're going to reconcile who we are in this world and how we live and all the things Nick's talking about, we have to reconcile and come to terms with ourselves and the way we've lived our lives in the past, because we're all guilty of things that we're all guilty of not caring enough and not giving people the time and love they need and other things. And for me, a lot of my books are about coming to terms with things. They ask 3 questions. All the books I've ever written, the heading is the same. Who are we? How do we get here? And where are we going? And in those key questions for me, there is a reconciliation, there's a reckoning, coming to terms with who we are. And I mean that both as a country. So you talk about the poem Matter and Black Lives Matter. The thing that kills me and then killed me in that year was listening to radio debate that people were not coming to terms with the fact that the Black experience in the world, and especially in Britain and America, is fundamentally different to anybody else in the world. 400 years of subjugation and of minds that were just not being recognized. And when I was digging that ground and listening to the radio, as is described in that poem, and the person was saying, yeah, but life's better for everybody now than it was. It's pretty harsh for everyone. Of course it was harsh for everyone. Of course it was harsh. My great-grandfather was a miner. Not the same as if you were descended from people who were pressed into slavery and indentured to service. It's completely different, and we don't recognize it. So part of this country moving forward is recognizing and reconciling our pasts. And that is, as I say, as a country, but also personally. And personally, we need to look at ourselves and say, I'm going to make decisions, because Nick's right. We've got to push on the Duke of Buckley. We've got to push on government. But actually, if every single person in the world would change, okay, so it is about us. There's an ontological change that needs to happen, and there's a kind of wide societal change that needs to happen. So it's getting both of those things right. And I think what Catherine's asking is a great question, which is, how do we come to terms with things? And there are things in here that I didn't mean to write about. My grandmother, there's a poem called Viking Gold in this book.
It's a very lovely poem, and she sounds a terrifying woman. She
was a terrifying woman, but only now do I understand why that was, I think. And, I think my grandfather was affected after the war, and I think he was a very difficult person to live with. And her method was probably controlling everything and being very strict and taking silliness and anything that's volatile out of that world. And so she was very strict, Lancashirian Methodism, no drinking, nothing, just, strict. But then, as I describe in that poem, that's that one incident where I went and saw her when she was just before she got dementia and just before she began unspooling, where we had the best day I ever had with her. And she dressed in all this Viking gold, and she made me fish pie, and we sat by the canal in Skipton and watched ducks, and she was laughing at everything. She was just wonderful. And I got the impression she was trying to show me just once, I don't know whether she knew what's going to happen, but she was trying to show me, this is who I was before all of it, before the war, before the Methodism, before the chapel, the strict Briarfield chapels, the Inghamite chapels got me. This is who I was, so I think there is part of the healing is coming to terms with that, paying attention to ourselves. Yeah, I do.
That's great. And so I'm going to rattle through some questions for you both, which you'll have to answer more succinctly. Nick, no, it's beautiful. Your illustrations are beautiful, says Jane Adams. I've read the book. Can you talk about the way you produce them? Are they lino cuts or illustrations? Thank you.
I call them lie knots or lie-no. Like they're done in exactly the same way as a lino cut is, as in it's a reduction process. Every mark you make is the mark that isn't seen on the final print. But because I'm a freelance illustrator and it costs 50 quid to hire out the print studio, and it takes a bloody long time to do linos, I basically decided to work out a way to do it with ink. So I do, I don't know if I have any around me. I'm not in my home at the moment, but basically I paint with a brush and ink every mark that everything that's white on the images is what I've painted in black. And then I put it on, I scan it in, and then I invert it on Photoshop, which basically mimics the print process. So they're fake lino cuts, just like in the Book of Trespass. But
have you invented this yourself? The lie knot?
Probably not, but I didn't learn it off anyone. Like I'm sure other people have figured it out. It's just quicker, and therefore you get more. You get more money per unit seconds spent on the job, basically. But with the Book of Trespass, I just fell in love with it as it's a slightly different thing. It's a bit more flowy because you're using a brush and not a scorper. You're not sort of going like that. You're kind of painting it. So certainly with the skies, it allows them to be a bit more fluid. But I still do linos.
Lino is a very time-consuming thing, though. You know, it is. But Nick, what maybe Nick's not saying there is that he still has to have the reverse image in his mind when he's doing it.
I know.
Same as lino, exactly the same as lino cut.
They have great energy and flow.
Bob's a lino cutter too.
Yeah,
cool. We're
I'm bursting in. A question from Lale. How to cut it, it's a slightly long one, but how do we make sure the nature connection continues in those new to it? Because the lockdown allowed many folk to get to explore nature more fully. And all this while balancing caring for nature, encouraging those exploring to take good care of it and tread gently. Everyone needs to be included on this journey for us to collectively make a true difference, don't they? Just your mark.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it goes all the way back to putting nature tables back in classrooms. It goes all the way back to, as Nick's saying, as a society, saying everybody is entitled to access land, to access ground, you know. I was lucky I had that as a child and I took it for granted. But fundamentally, the allotment as a principle is something we should all be aspiring to more widely. Yes. Because, you know, having allotments really does, you see children in allotments working land and all those kind of instinctive things happen. But I think, you know, it has to be across society, but it has the knock-on effect, when you do it well and you do it properly, of curing all those other problems, like people not understanding seasonality in food and the requirement for us to live seasonally rather than to just get food from all over the world. Those things are answered by the fact that you are growing things. But the other half of it is Nick's point here, which is you cannot have a country like Britain that is closing footpaths and allowing footpaths to be shut and nailed shut and closed down, or for areas of river and sea and coast and woodland that are inaccessible. And a lot of people say, well, you know, people can't be trusted in these places. But that's a vicious catch-22. If they've not grown up with these things, they've not been allowed to access them, how are they going to care for them? How are they going to know how to treat them properly? So those two things are current, I think, and they work together.
Yes, completely. I think we've got time for one more question. Apart from the one that's asking whether they can buy Nick's artworks, which that's going to be a question for you, Nick.
Hawkhornhays.com.
There you go. Perhaps Paul can put that in the Q&A. So many authors have written extensively about nature, but do you think, this is a very quick answer, poetry is the most suitable medium because it resonates with the ebb and flow of our life and breath?
Good question.
From Christian Hobart.
Hi, Christian. It's a great question. I think it's hard for me to answer because I really like a lot of prose writing on nature too. Not least your fine work, Peter. But you know, I love nature writing generally. I think poetry, as I said right at the beginning, I think poetry has an elemental sense to it. It's open. It somehow does these two things of being familiar and approachable and reachable, but also reaching out. So it has the ability to say things that that the kind of more straightforward prose doesn't have. And so I think nature, you know, nature's one of these things that it's very hard to try and talk about nature in a way, the effect of nature on people. A lot of writers struggle to do that, but I think poetry allows you to do that. You read the poetry of Derek Mann or Ted Hughes or, you know, whoever you're reading, those books, those poems allow you to see nature in all its kind of many, like I said at the beginning, this duality of being something terrifying and amazing and awesome and small and vast and all these different elements that that nature is. So I think poetry does let you somehow express that in a way that prose doesn't always. Yeah.
That's very true. So just checking that, I think we're going to run out of time now. No, I don't think we've got any time for any more questions. That was so interesting and very powerful and beautiful when you read. Thank you very much. And some great chat and talk about hope for the future. There's a lovely line which I wrote down from your poem Ivy. Even in darkening days, life triumphs always, which
there you go.
You have woven little threads of hope throughout your poetry. Thank you.
Yes, I have. Yeah, and I've ended with hope. Hopefully, the poem Light and that the end of Duel 2 is escape.
I'm not going to spoil the ending of Duel 2, but it's very dramatic. So thank you very much, Nick Hayes and Rob Cowan, and to everyone coming. I'm just going to quickly say that on Monday, I'm walking on Wimbledon Common, if anyone lives nearby, with Catherine Norbury, who has produced an incredible anthology, Women on Nature, long overdue. There's 100 authors in there from 16th century up to now. Some absolutely brilliant writing. So I'm walking with her on Monday, talking to Anita Sethi about her incredible book, I Belong Here, on Tuesday. Tracy Chevalier and John Drury are talking on Wednesday. That's just the next 3 or 4 days. So keep checking the Urban Tree Festival website, and thank you to the Woodland Trust for sponsoring this particular event. And thank you, Rob and Nick. And this is, we get to the moment where we suddenly will just disappear. The Heeding, yes, The Heeding is out when? 17th of June, isn't it?
17th of June, yeah, 17th of June. And you know, but you can pre-order it now, and that would really help get the message out there that there's carrying.
And it says it's $12.99. Can it be $12.99?
It's $12.99.
Well, that's a steal.
Exactly. You would think it'd be a lot more when you get all these words and pictures in. Yeah.
Exactly.
But Nick and I are also going to do some other events, and we're going to probably have some prints. I think we're going to do some prints. Nick, do you want to explain what we're going to do? I'm trying to remember what we're going to do. We're going to do prints with poems and artwork and sign them and have those for sale as well at some point.
Great.
Big ones.
I'd like to reserve one. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you both very much. Paul might burst into this meeting, and here's Paul to say any last thing.
Thank you very much for that. It was fantastic. And I just thought I'd say, where can people pre-order the book from? That'd be, if there's a preferred vendor of the book.
Your local indie would be the best place for us. And they are all aware of it, and they're all doing stuff. And come June, there's going to be lots of windows with lots of Nick's work in them and lots of words in them. So your indie is the best. And if you can't do that, do Waterstones anywhere, you know?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We're going to stop the recording now, and just a reminder that we've got dozens of activities and events lined up over the next 9 days, including the ones that Peter mentioned with the book club. And of course, one other thing to mention is that the Urban Tree Festival relies on donations. If you're able to, we'd very much appreciate donations. And once again, thank you, Peter, Nick, and Rob, for a wonderful event.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Listening.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.